I'm 61. I've lived in the same quiet neighborhood for over 30 years. My husband and I raised 2 children here, both grown now, both living out of state with lives of their own. These days, it's just me, the garden, and a familiar kind of silence. Love, for me, had always been about consistency, not sparks or surprises. I used to believe that after a certain age, things just settled. You knew who you were, what you'd built, and you simply stayed the course. But I was wrong. I never thought something like this could happen to me. Please, don't make the same mistake I did. It was a warm Tuesday afternoon when I first noticed Michael standing at the edge of his lawn, trimming his roses. He had moved in across the street a little over a year ago after his wife passed. We'd shared a few conversations, brief, neighborly exchanges about weather, garbage pickup, or which grocery store had the best peaches that week. That day I waved, and he smiled back. There was something different in his eyes, something softer. He walked over, garden gloves tucked in his back pocket, and asked if I had a moment. I told him I was just about to make some tea, and that he was welcome to join me. We sat on my back porch, facing the garden I'd spent the better part of my spring planting. The lavender was in full bloom, and the air smelled of rosemary and jasmine. I handed him a cup of Earl Grey, and noticed how his fingers brushed mine, not intentionally, but just enough to make me notice. I hadn't felt that kind of awareness in years. "You keep this place like a sanctuary," he said, looking around. "It feels peaceful." "I guess I need the calm," I replied. "Helps me breathe when the house feels too quiet." He nodded. "I understand that. The silence. It's loud, isn't it?" I looked at him, really looked. And in that moment, it felt like we were 2 people who'd been sitting in separate boats for years, slowly drifting toward the same quiet dock without realizing it. The conversation lingered into the early evening. He helped me bring the chairs in, washed his own teacup without being asked, and left with a gentle, "Thanks for today, Sharon." I didn't realize how much I needed it. After he left, I stood at the window longer than I care to admit, watching him cross the street. His shoulders were slightly hunched like he was carrying something invisible, something heavy. I knew that look. I'd seen it in the mirror for years after my husband passed. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of Michael exactly, but because of how I felt around him. Awake, alert, like I'd forgotten how to feel anything other than functional. It was unsettling, and in some strange way, exciting. The next afternoon, he was back. This time with a small basket of plums he picked from a friend's orchard. "Thought you might like these," he said with a half shrug, half smile. I invited him in again. We sat at the kitchen table. This time the conversation wandered further, from childhood summers to what it felt like to sleep alone after decades of not. There was a moment when his hand rested on the table, close enough that mine almost reached for it. Almost. But I didn't. Instead, I asked if he'd like to come over for dinner that weekend. Just something simple. He said yes without hesitation. After he left, I stared at the basket of plums and felt something stir in me, something I hadn't allowed in years. Not since my husband, not since the world told me I'd had my chapter, and now I was just meant to reread it over and over. But what if there was still a page left to turn? Didn't know it then, but that dinner. It would change everything. I spent the next few days preparing. It was silly, really. The way I fussed over the menu, rearranged the dining room, even bought new candles that smelled like cedar and vanilla. I kept telling myself it was just a dinner between neighbors. Nothing more. But the truth is, I hadn't felt this kind of fluttery nervousness in a long, long time. Saturday evening came, golden and mild. The sun hung low over the trees, casting soft amber light through the windows. I wore a simple navy blouse and jeans, nothing too suggestive. But still, I took the time to curl my hair and apply a bit of lipstick. Just enough to feel visible. When Michael rang the bell, I paused for a breath before opening the door. He stood there holding a bottle of wine and wearing a gray button-down shirt that made his eyes seem even softer than usual. "Wow," he said after a beat. "You look beautiful, Sharon." I smiled, maybe a little too quickly. "Come on in. Hope you're hungry." The table was set for two. I'd made roasted chicken with lemon and thyme, a side of green beans, and a peach cobbler for dessert, something my mother used to make when she wanted to impress. Dinner was warm, easy. We talked, we laughed, and for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel like I had to edit myself. He asked me about my art, something I hadn't mentioned to anyone in ages, and I showed him a few watercolors I'd been too shy to hang. "You've got something special," he said, looking at a painting of a quiet lake at dusk. "There's feeling in this, depth." I didn't know how to take the compliment. My husband had never been cruel, but he wasn't one for noticing things like that. After dinner, we moved to the living room. I put on some music, soft jazz, barely noticeable, and we sat on the couch, just talking. The candles flickered between us, and outside the cicadas hummed their summer song. At one point, our knees brushed. I froze. He didn't. Instead, Michael looked at me and said, "I hope I'm not overstepping, but I've felt more like myself these past few days than I have in years. And I think it's because of you." My heart thudded. I didn't know what to say. I could feel the wall I'd built over the years, thick with grief, with duty, with fear, trembling a little under the weight of those words. "I don't know what this is," I said carefully, "or what it's supposed to be. But I feel it too, and it scares me." Michael reached for my hand. "Maybe we don't need to name it." "Not yet. Maybe it's enough that we're both here." I let him hold it. For a long while we sat like that. No rushing. No need to fill the silence. Just two people rediscovering what it meant to be seen. And then, a quiet shift. He stood, walked over to the window, and looked out into the darkness. "You know," he said, not facing me, "I haven't invited anyone into my home since my wife passed. Not one person." I looked at him, surprised. He turned. "But if you ever wanted to, I'd like you to come over sometime, just to talk, or not talk, whatever you need." There was something in his voice, a tremble, that let me see the man behind the gentle neighbor, the loneliness, the hope. "Okay," I said. "I'd like that." As he left that night, something inside me shifted. Not a dramatic, fireworks kind of thing. More like the first crack of sunlight through heavy curtains. What began as a friendly visit was no longer just that. And deep down, I knew we were on the edge of something we couldn't quite name yet. But we were moving toward it. Together. The days that followed felt different. I still woke early, made my tea, tended to the garden, and went through the motions of my usual routines. But now there was an anticipation threaded into the hours, subtle, like the scent of lilacs on a breeze. I found myself glancing up the window more often, hoping to catch a glimpse of Michael walking his dog or trimming his hedges. Sometimes he did. Sometimes he didn't. But the hoping, that was new. One Wednesday afternoon, just after I'd finished pruning the rose bushes out back, I heard a knock on the front door. I hadn't been expecting anyone. When I opened it, there he was, Michael, holding a small plastic container and smiling like a teenager caught doing something bold. "I made too much stew," he said, lifting it. "Thought you might like some." I laughed softly and stepped aside. "You know, there's a thing called a phone." "And risk you saying no," he replied with a grin. We ate together again, this time on the back porch under a cloudy sky that threatened rain. The stew was delicious, hearty, full of flavor, but it was the way he looked at me while I ate that made my hands tremble just a little on the spoon. There was something unspoken blooming between us now, and neither of us seemed quite ready to say it aloud. After lunch, I offered him coffee, and we sat by the living room window as the drizzle began to tap gently on the glass. He told me more about his wife, not in a sad or heavy way, just in the way someone does when they're finally able to speak without pain choking every word. I listened, my hand resting lightly on the edge of the couch near his. At one point, our fingers met again, and this time, neither of us pulled away. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. "Of course. Do you ever wonder if it's too late to feel new things, to let yourself open up again?" I looked down for a moment, thinking about all the years I'd spent closed off, believing love had a timeline. That once you lost it, that was that. "Yes," I finally said, "all the time, but I'm starting to believe it isn't true." He leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to mess this up. Whatever this is, I know we've both lived a lot of life already, and maybe we carry more than we show, but I don't think I've looked forward to anything the way I look forward to seeing you." My breath caught. There it was, the quiet confession we'd been dancing around for weeks. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My throat felt tight, my chest warm in a way that wasn't entirely comfortable, but wasn't unpleasant either. I was feeling again, deeply, unexpectedly, and it both thrilled and terrified me. When he kissed me, it was gentle, hesitant, a question, not a demand. And I answered, not just with my lips, but with the way I leaned into him, with the way I touched his face, tracing the lines life had etched into his skin. We weren't young, but there was something incredibly tender, almost innocent, in that moment, like two people learning each other for the very first time. We didn't rush. There was no urgency, no need to define or decide. We simply sat there, rain still pattering on the windows, wrapped in a silence that felt fuller than any words could have made it. Later, as he got ready to leave, he paused at the door. "I'll see you tomorrow," he asked, a hopeful tilt in his voice. I smiled. "You better." He kissed my cheek and walked into the misty evening, leaving behind a warmth that lingered long after the door closed. For the first time in years, I wasn't just existing. I was feeling, and I had no idea where it would lead. But I knew this. I was no longer afraid of the path. The next morning, the sunlight filtered through my curtains in soft, golden streaks. It was the kind of light that made everything feel gentle, like the world was offering grace, quietly and without expectation. I sat at my kitchen table with my tea, still thinking about the night before, about Michael, about that kiss. At my age, you think you felt all the kinds of love there are to feel. The passionate kind, the steady, comforting kind, the devastating kind. But this was something different. This was a beginning wrapped in the skin of an ordinary day. By late afternoon, he was back, this time with no pretense of stew or errands. He just knocked, looked at me with those same kind eyes, and said, "Can we talk?" I nodded, stepped aside, and let him in. We sat in the living room, No candles, no music. Just the quiet hum of the ceiling fan and the weight of whatever it was we both needed to say. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady but soft, "about how easy it is to keep living like we've already had our big moments. Like all that's left is memory and maintenance. But that's not how I want to spend whatever time I've got left." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat growing. "I was scared," he continued, "because caring about you means letting myself be vulnerable again. It means opening doors I'd closed. But Sharon, I want to open them. With you." There was a pause, the kind that holds its breath. Then it was my turn. "I didn't expect you," I said quietly. "I didn't expect to feel anything again, really. But every time you're near, it's like something inside me wakes up. And it's not just the loneliness. It's joy. It's the sound of laughter I'd forgotten I could still make. It's the way you listen. It's how you see me." He looked down like he was absorbing every word. "I'm not promising some fairy tale," I added, "but I'm not afraid anymore. If you're asking me to try, the answer is yes." He exhaled, a deep, relieved breath, and reached across the coffee table for my hand. We sat there, hand in hand, not planning the future or rewriting the past, just being present. Two people who'd walked through the storms of life and still found each other right here in the quiet aftermath. In the weeks that followed, things unfolded slowly, tenderly. We took walks together, shared dinners that weren't perfect but were filled with laughter. Sometimes we just sat on the porch in silence, watching the sky change colors and listening to the world turn. Neighbors noticed. Some smiled. Some raised eyebrows, but I didn't care. I was happy. One evening, as we sat on his porch, his hand wrapped around mine, our legs brushing lightly, he turned and said, "You know, I don't think we found each other by accident." "No," I said, looking out at the soft purple sky. "I think life knew we still had something left to feel." And that was the truth. Our story didn't begin with fireworks or grand declarations. It began with a knock on the door, a shared cup of tea, and two open hearts willing to be seen again. Sometimes the most unexpected turn can bring you exactly where you were meant to be. And sometimes a friendly visit changes everything.